everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, John. And man, rain.
Yeah.
Yesterday, as we're recording this, we had rain yesterday. Fargo, an inch and a quarter maybe.
On the 15th
and
of May.
And man, it really brings to mind the old saying that you just can't replace rain.
No,
because
well,
nothing suffices like rain to make things grow.
We've had a good spring. We've had a great spring.
It has.
for so many different reasons, because we've had moisture, we've had some rain, we've had periods where it's been this weekend beautiful, clear skies, weather.
Oh yeah,
time to get out and do some yard work.
And the blooming trees. The flowering crab apples have been awesome. We've got some things blooming in our perennial garden. And it's fun. The weather has been really nice because otherwise when these flowering crab apples start blooming, and if we get a 80, 90 degree day and wind, they just plop apart. So it has been a nice spring. Man, I've mowed our lawn about 3 times, so it's going to be fun to talk about lawns today.
I mowed my first earlier this week. Felt good about that. It's always good to get it fired up and get it going over. But with that, it does come with gardening season comes the most popular questions that you're asked, I'm sure, all year long is like, what's going on with my lawn?
Lawns rank right up there among probably right up there among blossom endrata and tomatoes. Lawns
What's
is one
the
of
problem
the,
with this?
Because a person sees from early spring, when things start to green up from springtime all the way until the end of the growing season, we have our lawns.
Yeah.
And if the lawn just doesn't look the way you'd like it, you're living with that or lack of it kind of all season long. And so it's fun to talk about lawns. It's interesting too. Lawns are beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Lawns have gotten a little controversial, because some people say, well, there's a lot of input that goes on just something to make it look like a golf course.
How many resources?
How many resources are they sucking up? But, there's benefits to lawns, great benefits. And one of those that I enjoy is a 5 foot by 5 foot square of lawn grass, which isn't really huge. That produces enough oxygen for one adult for a day. So even having a small area of lawn produces oxygen for us, and they filter out pollutants and do lots of good things. So, the judicious use of chemicals, fertilizers, weed killers, it's all about the judicious use so that we aren't overdoing it, over applying. But lots of good things can happen with lawns.
And you and I are both homeowners, so we have yards that we get to go out into. But for 20 years, I lived downtown Fargo, and I lived in a property that did have a small little lawn area, and it was always so nice to see. I think I can't imagine what that would have been like if they didn't have the lawn there and they didn't have the few trees that they did have there.
The cooling effect.
The cooling, but also just kind of the emotional thing, just to be able to, it was nice to come home, park, and look out there and see a lawn.
Exactly. And it doesn't always have to be such a big area.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Exactly. And I like to think of lawn as kind of a canvas on which the rest of your yard is featured. Perennial flower gardens, landscape. And if you have an area of lawn in between that, it just kind of helps to set the lawn off. And of course, if you have kids, gosh, you got to play kickball and everything else on the lawn, baseball. And so lots of good things to be had for lawns. And but like you said, even like downtown, a little area of grass, it just helps soften, cool, make it a more friendly place. Yeah, even with a little bit of lawn.
Yeah, the lawn can be an extension of the house itself because you can have programming out there. You can have how many people have picnics on the lawn. They gather out there. They do something out there, bigger
and
events.
Even your deck, patios can all be, an extension kind of with that lawn. It all creates a big unified area. And so, it all depends too on, whether it's a little lawn or a larger lawn. It depends on having it healthy, looking good. And so it's going to be fun today to talk about some of those things. Lawns do not have to be high maintenance. Ours is low maintenance. And so some of the things we talk about today will be how to have a very nice lawn without having a lot of work and a lot of inputs.
Yeah. And you recently got a letter that was kind of somewhat indicative of a lot of the questions people have about their lawns.
Yeah, it is. And of course, when I get emails about lawns, it's usually not people showing me how nice their lawn is.
Right.
It's usually because it isn't performing quite the way that
it's when people need help, they reach out to you.
Yep, exactly. And so Erica wrote in that her lawn was just looking sick. Her husband tried replanting it twice, and it's just patchy. She sent a photo with me, and of course, I love show and tell over a podcast.
Right.
But I'll paint you a picture.
We could post that on our Instagram page.
We can do that, and I'll paint you a picture here. Okay, the lawn I would say was about 1/3 yellow, patchy. There was some green grass, but just yellow and thin. And just when you took a look at it, it just looked unhealthy. And she also indicates that the neighbor's lawn looks great, which from the photo I could see. The neighbor's lawn looks good, green.
Separated by a fence.
And so let's talk about some of the things that she is dealing with on that lawn, and many people, because there are some common denominators. When your lawn isn't looking good, there's some common denominators that we should look at. And so there are some relatively simple things that they're maybe going to sound almost too simple that we can do to bring our lawns to good health. And now a key in this is patience, because having a healthy lawn, which is kind of almost self-sustaining, kind of taking care of itself a little bit, requires on doing simple things over maybe a 3-year period. So it may not respond immediately, but these are the things that we do. Well, first of all, let's talk about some of the causes of why lawns don't look good. Okay, now one thing is she does mention that she has dogs. And of course, dogs then create all the yellow spots around, and also traffic. Where a person has dogs, there's oftentimes more traffic in that area too. So of course, the urine and the problems caused by that caused a yellowing. And so each spring, it does help if you really saturate the lawn, unless you're getting an inch or two of rain, but saturate those yellow spots to get that material to move down out of the root zone. Okay, and then some of those areas you may need to reseed. Now, how do you tell if whether it's caused by dogs or a yellow or a brown patch in your lawn? How do you tell in the spring if that's going to come back? Okay, in May here, middle, 3rd week in May or so, take a look at those. Get down and examine those spots, or any dead spots, and if you see a little bit of green coming from the crown, that's the area between the old grass blade, and the roots. If you see a little sprout of green coming, it's going to recover. Our lawns have a very good growth rate. But if when you're kind of working away, feeling away, raking away at those dead patches, if it's just coming off loosely, then you're going to really have to reseed those areas. But small areas, such as maybe less than 6 inches in diameter, 4 inches, our grass has the amazing ability to spread sideways. And so it'll fill in little areas. Excuse me. That's why along a sidewalk, you have to trim along your sidewalk, because the grass even wants to try to grow out over your sidewalk. And so if it's a 4-inch, 6-inch, if you fertilize, which we'll talk about in a bit, if you fertilize that grass will spread sideways and fill in quite nicely. If it's larger than maybe 6-inch diameter, then I'd go ahead and reseed that, which we'll also talk about in a minute. So dogs, obvious kind of reason for things, but also traffic in the lawn. And I mean, it's great for kids to be out playing, but the more traffic a lawn has, the more compaction that the soil has, and grass can diminish. Sometimes you can even see a little trail where you walk from the house to a gate or something. And of course, in that area, it becomes more compact and hard packed. And so in a minute, after we go through all these causes, we'll talk about how do we remedy those. Okay, so compaction can be one of the problems. Another thing that can happen is maybe the grass seed that a person put in isn't the best adapted. Erica mentioned that her husband reseeded twice. But when a person looks at the label of a grass seed, for our area, it should have at least 50% Kentucky bluegrass. Some of the fast-growing mixes have an annual grass in. annual ryegrass that dies out over winter. So some of the patches might have been seeded and looked fine last year, but then that grass does not come back this year. So very important to choose a grass blend that has at least 50% Kentucky bluegrass, so it's going to keep coming on back. Another fairly common problem is mowing too short. Mowing too short. The shorter mowing height has been shown to create shallow roots, and lawns can actually diminish from being mowed too short. So we'll talk about the preferred in a little bit also. The other thing that sometimes goes on, if maybe there wasn't enough topsoil put down originally, but there's not much you can do after the fact on that. Improper watering. If a person waters lawns, it's tempting to water a little bit more often and only put a little bit on. And so we need to water deeper and not quite as often. And so stay tuned for the how to water deeply and how much to put on. We've had a lot of problems, too, with grubs in the lawn, grubs and sod webworms. So there are insects that can cause some of these problems. And, so sometimes it's not always so easy to tell if that's the problem. If grubs are the problem, they actually eat off the roots. So you can grab onto these dead patches, lift up, and with no roots, these patches of sod will come on up. Grubs are sometimes even attacked in rural areas by skunks and raccoons. Skunks and raccoons will just literally pull up that and go for the grubs underneath. And, the other thing, too, we've not had lawn-friendly summers. We've had 3 summers of hot and dry. And so even though you might water your lawn, our lawns still don't like heat. Our lawns are called cool season grasses, which thrive when the weather's cool. They thrive in the spring, they thrive in September and October, but in the middle of summer, in the heat, they can diminish even if you're watering. Each year I get a number of emails, questions from people that say, gosh, my lawn it's lush, I water, but now all of a sudden I've got these kind of circular brown spots. Well, sometimes in the heat of the summer, even if you're watering, you can develop fungal type diseases. Your lawn actually becomes too lush. And so see all the different causes. And so when a lawn is kind of yellow, patchy, not looking the best, there's a lot of different causes that can be causing that. But there are some practices that almost all of us can do to make our lawn healthy and to help repair these areas.
I think that's let's take a quick little break. When we come back, we'll talk about one of the main ones, which is fertilizing.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're back and we're talking about lawn care now that spring is here, summer will soon be here. It's green outside. We've been getting lots of moisture. And I think that one of the things that we should start with would be fertilizer. Because if you're having trouble with your lawn, maybe it needs a little bit of help, maybe it needs a little bit of food. When is a good time to fertilize?
Well, lawn grass is a heavy feeder. I love that old gardening term. It's a heavy feeder, just meaning that it responds well to nutrition and fertilizer. And of course, we have different options. You can use an organic type of fertilizer applied to the lawn, or you can use the synthetic type fertilizers. Organic fertilizers take a little longer to respond, but they're also longer lasting. The synthetic type fertilizer, the granules, the bagged granules, those are a little faster acting, but they don't always last quite as long. So you have choices. So very important, the timing of fertilizer. The old fertilizer recommendations used to be to fertilize early, such as early May. even maybe late April. The idea was to get your grass to green up faster. But they actually found that was force-feeding grass before it was ready to use the nutrition. And a lot of that fertilizer could be washed off in spring rains, heavy spring rains, or runoff. And so the recommendation from the last decade or more has been to delay spring fertilizing of lawns until closer to Memorial Day. So the lawn is already green, growing. You've probably mowed it a time or two, or I'm on my third mowing.
Okay.
And so applying the grass fertilizer around Memorial Day, or let's say after the middle of May, the lawn grass is green, actively growing, and it can immediately use the nutrition that we give it. So there's less chance that something's going to run off or it not be as efficient. And towards Memorial Day, and there's lots of choices with lawn-type fertilizers. I have found that some of the national brands, versus the generic brands of lawn fertilizers, some of the national brands seem to have more science behind them. They also might have some of the micronutrients like iron that can help your grass to green up better. So I've just found from my own experience, I've gone, even though they're a little more expensive, I go to the national brand of fertilizer, and it just seems like it's worked out better for me. And now these fertilizer granules that a person puts on need to be dissolved in water in order for them to get into the root system and for the grass to take them up. So, boy, fertilizing right before a rain it would be ideal. So if we were forecasting to get a rain around Memorial Day, it'd be great to go out and spread that fertilizer on it. And, if we don't get rain, those fertilizer granules are just going to kind of sit there. And so even watering would help at that point. Yeah, I got to tell you, though, okay, we think about fertilizing our lawns in springtime here in May because it's green, we're mowing, we're loving it. But there's a more important time to fertilize in addition to Memorial Day, and that's in September, around Labor Day. And so make a note on your calendar to fertilize. And of course, we'll remind you here on the podcast to fertilize about Labor Day. And now this really impressed me. Okay, the turf researchers say that is the most important time of year, Labor Day, to apply your fertilizer. Memorial Day is the second most important time. In fall of the year, the grass is naturally making more root growth, and it's filling out sideways, and it's developing its health to survive winter and to come back the next spring. And if around Labor Day, if we give it that nutrition, it is going to carry through and be that much healthier lawn than in spring. Okay, now here's how this really impressed me. Okay, 2 years ago, Labor Day, I followed the recommendation. I fertilized our lawn, but I ran out. I had a strip. Well, it was probably about 10 feet wide by, probably 40 feet long, so good size. And I ran out, and I didn't get back to the hardware store to pick up another bag of fertilizer. And then all of a sudden, it was getting too late. And so I didn't. Well, the following spring, and I've got photos to prove this. The following spring, most of the lawn, nice green and rich, nice color. And that I didn't get the fertilizer on was a lighter shade of green. And do you know, okay, so last fall I fertilized everything. Do you know I can still see that area a couple of years later? I can see there's a little less shade of green in that area. And so, it's going to even out, but it really impressed on me the advantage of that fall fertilizing and then fertilize in May. And so lawns really do like that nutrition. And again, it's not just about wasting resources because lawns do many good things for us. So it's about keeping them healthy. And so kind of that minimum of 2 fertilizings, some lawn care programs do more than that, but it's those 2, the spring and the fall, that really create a deeply rooted. So now when we talk about, all the causes of things going wrong and how to remedy them, this is a very important remedy for a lawn that's not looking good, is to fertilize it. And then also don't neglect that autumn fertilizing. Very important for getting the health back in.
What things should people look for in a fertilizer?
Fertilizer is very high in nitrogen, which on a fertilizer bag, there's three main numbers. The first is nitrogen, then it's phosphorus, and then potassium. And lawns, the green of a lawn really responds to nitrogen. That's the first number in a fertilizer bag. And so lawn fertilizer is going to be very high in nitrogen, that first number. And so when you're kind of comparing bargain brands to a more expensive brand, take a look. The more expensive brand is probably going to be higher in nitrogen. And some of it may be a slow release nitrogen, which is good. So it doesn't just give it a quick shot that comes and goes, but something that's going to last longer into the season. And so take a look at that. You do get what you pay for. And then I also look for iron. If it's got some iron, that's going to help our lawn grass too.
What about overseeding? When should you overseed? I mean, what's the balance there between, should you be putting, we're talking about fertilizing within the next couple of weeks here is the ideal window.
Yeah, what if you need to overseed or seed some areas? And because the high-powered lawn fertilizer, the standard type that you'd use, could burn tender little grass seedlings that are sprouting. But at the garden centers or hardware store, you will find a lawn fertilizer for newly seeded lawns. It's just the right blend, not too hot, not too cold, not too potent, but that will give nutrition for a young, developing, newly seeded lawn. And so look for that. So if you're overseeding some patches, reseeding some patches, I would use that almost on the entire lawn, that for newly seeded lawns. That'll give nutrition for the old established lawns, but it also won't burn the tender new grass seeds that's coming up. And that's very important that's one of the solutions for these grass problems is if you detect no green little sprigs coming and then is overseeding. And overseeding some of those patches, you can get a little nice garden soil or bagged garden soil, put that kind of on so you've got a little bit of seed to soil contact and then reseed. And of course, the key to getting grass seed to sprout is what I call keeping it dark moist, so that soil has to be continually moist, because grass seed, you've done it right, seeded it right, if you can still see most of the grass seed on the surface, because grass seed doesn't get planted like most seeds. So you just barely rake it into the surface and you should still be able to see grass seed on the top. Maybe mulch it with something, straw, light layer, or if you've got grass clippings that haven't been treated with an herbicide, those could be used for a little bit of mulch. But watering in morning and evening isn't unheard of to keep it dark moist. That makes or breaks a newly seeded or a reseeded lawn.
What about, I didn't hear if you said it, but burlap bags or those kind of cloth that you can kind of roll out and pin down maybe over a section? Is that a good idea too?
Yeah, those work well as long as, burlap bags, as soon as you start seeing a little grass activity, you need to take off the burlap bags, because I know there are nightmare stories of people that leave the burlap on a little too long, the grass comes up through the burlap, and then you remove the burlap and off comes the grass with it. And so, but anything you can kind of use to mitigate the sun and the wind to keep it moist does help. And the garden centers also sell bags of packaged mulch material also.
And then again, people should be looking for, in our area, at least 50% Kentucky bluegrass.
Yep. And for a shaded spot, a good percentage being maybe 50% of fescue.
Okay.
Fescue grasses, Fescue. Fescue are the more shade-tolerant grasses.
So one last question about this, because we're talking about fertilizing and we're talking about seeding. Do you use a separate fertilized spreader and a separate seed spreader?
I'm lucky because I bought it. It's a national brand, and that has settings both for fertilizer and for grass seed.
Okay.
And even though I misplaced I try to keep owner's manuals on everything, but I misplaced it. But online, it's a Scott's brand. Mm-hmm. We don't promote individual brands of anything. I'm not promoting that, but mine happens to be a Scott's, and I can look online for the owner's manual, and it tells me for grass seed, set it to whatever setting. For fertilizer, set it to this setting on it. And so I like that. So I use the same fertilizer spreader, seeder. Yeah, I seeded our whole lawn with it 7 years or so ago.
Do you have to wash it out or anything between the fertilizing and
That's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, very good idea.
All right.
Notice I said it's a good idea. You didn't ask me if I actually do it. But yes, I actually do.
All right, let's take another break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about mowing the lawn.
Yes, all important mowing.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back and we're talking about lawn care now that spring is here and summer's just around the corner. You recently wrote about that no mow May, this kind of popular trend that started maybe over the last decade. That maybe no mow
Britain.
Wait, in Britain, okay.
Yeah, Britain, 2019.
Okay. So yeah, really recent.
Yeah, fairly recently.
Okay. But it's maybe not such a good idea. It's maybe not all it's cracked up to be. Why is that?
Well, yeah, it's a catchy title, No Mow May. It was well intended. It was during the month of May when our pollinating bees, and we need those for fruit trees and strawberries and cucumbers and everything else. So the idea was to just let things bloom in the lawn, and our pollinators will have pollen and nectar and all kinds of good things. So it started well intentioned, and then the city in Wisconsin, Appleton, grabbed onto that and actually promoted it and promoted people not to mow. But here's then the reality of it. Okay, in theory, if you don't mow your lawn, there's a meadow of wildflowers waiting to bloom forth, that'd be totally awesome.
Sound totally desirable.
Yes, but what happens in reality when we don't mow our lawns? What blooms around town, and I've noticed some that haven't mowed, and I mean that's somebody's prerogative. They can certainly not mow if they don't want. Unless the city ordinance prohibits it. But anyway, what blooms it's dandelions. And dandelions are not native. They were introduced into this continent in 1600, so they're not a native plant. And there's some problems with dandelions. One of those being dandelions are not the most nutritious pollen and food for bees and other pollinators. The bee people, the entomologists have investigated that. Dandelion pollen is low in amino acids and some other things that our pollinators need. So that's one problem. It's not the most nutritious source. The other problem with dandelions is they crowd out other plants. When they shed those fluffy seeds, they land in other areas, and dandelion seed has no dormancy. It can sprout immediately, and of course, they're a perennial. And so next to my lawn, I've got an area of some native flowers. Okay, so if I don't mow my lawn, have dandelions blowing, and those seeds get into my native flower little flower bed, and then the dandelions sprout and they crowd out my good things that are actually better pollen for the pollinators. And so, if somebody doesn't want to mow their dandelions, that's certainly their right. But I think you should be prepared to keep that seed on your own property, which is almost impossible. Yeah. And so there are problems with not mowing and letting dandelions. The other thing too is it's very hard on a lawn. Have you ever been gone on vacation, for 2-3 weeks, come back and your lawn, your lawn is kind of long, then you go try to get it back and the lawn is quite stemmy. Yeah. It's hard on a lawn. And so it's not kind of the healthiest for lawns. And so anyway, both North Dakota State University and University of Minnesota, as well as many others, are not in favor of no mow May. It was well-intentioned, but it's not producing the valuable effects that we had hoped.
What kind of feedback did you get to that column? I'm wondering.
Yeah,
I think people have, as you know, and as we're talking about, people have a lot of opinions and a lot of vested interest in their lawns.
So it was interesting to watch some of the response. There was a person or two on a Facebook post that indicated, well, they've followed No Mow May, and it's totally wonderful. They see the bees, and everything is perfect with it. And so why would a columnist be not in favor of it? But I don't think they read the entire column as to what the downside was of it. And so I got a kick out of it. There were a number of people then that were defending and saying, well, extension services have reviewed this, and it's not what it's cracked up to be. And they said this column, but then one person indicated that, well, the column was poorly written and he didn't explain all the whys. And all the whys, well, sometimes maybe they didn't read all the things. But
poorly read, I would say, too.
Exactly. So it was interesting. I did chuckle at it, but some of the people, some that are proponents of it, I don't think have, they're very well-meaning, but they haven't taken the step to look, okay, we've had a few years of this. Now let's analyze if it's accomplished what it has been. So yeah, I don't write a whole lot of things that are controversial. No. I mean, tall bearded iris aren't really controversial, versus I suppose an ornamental grass. But so I did have to chuckle a little bit, but it was nice people were talking about the issue.
Yeah, it gets a conversation going.
Yeah, it did, and it and it's all about helping people with information that's going to help them. So instead of letting the dandelions grow, instead plant some wild flowers in a little flower bed next to it. It'll be better nutrition for those bees. Plant apple trees, plum trees, wonderful pollen and nectar for our pollinators.
And I will say that I know somebody who's very close to the show kind of, I think, jokingly grumbled, well, now they have to mow in May. Now they have to get the lawnmower out. I will say to people who are, maybe grumbling about that, remember that Don was one of the first people to tell you, too, that you should be mowing to mulch your leaves instead of raking them up in the fall.
Yes.
And how much of a day saver was that for people? At that time when that came out, people were about ready to give you a crown.
Yeah, see, it's all about helping people and helping our plants. Exactly. So it's interesting. We mentioned No Mow May, so that can be very hard to let a lawn grow, and it's capable of growing 15 inches. In May, it can grow 12 to 15 inches. So, and that can be very stressful. So what is the best mowing height? Now, this is one of those simple things that we can do that will improve a lawn over time. So with all the things that could go wrong with a lawn, one of the simplest cures, again, it's going to take time, 1, 2, 3 growing seasons, but mow at 3-inch high. 3-inch high has been determined, or maybe even 3.5-inch high. That has been determined to be the ideal height because there's a correlation between a higher mowing height, 3.5 inches, and deeper rooting. And this was easy turf research done over decades. Okay, a low mowing height has been shown to have a reduced root system. The roots don't go as far down. And so that mowing height does a number of things. It helps shade the roots because remember our grasses are cool season. So if the soil is kept cooler and more moist, the grass loves it. It also helps shade out some of the weeds, so you don't have to put as many weed killers on. And so that 3.5 inches, and start now in May. The first mowing you can go a little shorter, the last mowing in fall a little shorter, but throughout the growing season, stick to the 3 to 3.5. Now on my own lawnmower, that's about the second highest. That's about the second highest lever on our own mower. And so you can easily check after you mow a little bit, use a ruler, tape measure, see what mowing height you actually are at. But that is one of the simplest things, just up the mowing height. And, it looks nice and uniform. It doesn't look shaggy. It's not going to flop over and look weird. and yet it does such benefit. Also, in mowing, there's no need to bag up the clippings. The clippings, with the newer mulching type mowers, the clippings should filter down in. You don't want them to lay on top like a hayfield. In that case, you need to either bag or rake them off. But if they filter down in, those lawn clippings are also helping to kind of mulch the grass roots, keep it cooler, help reduce weed competition, and also they decompose into some really nice compost material. So it's almost like top dressing your lawn with compost over time. And so no need to bag them up and just return those in. And I know some people think that if I mow high like that, aren't I going to have to mow more often? But actually, they've done research even on that. People who keep their lawns short actually end up mowing more frequently than at the 3-inch level because they feel like it's getting a little long, so I need to scalp it down again.
And I wonder, like, how often should you be mowing your lawn? And I think that a lot of people would say, like, you'll know it when you'll see it, when it starts seeing really. But are there any benefits to letting it grow a little bit longer?
Yeah, there's a good rule of thumb, and that is the grass plants don't like more than a third of their height taken off at any one time. So if you're doing the 3-inch, you can let it get up to 4 inches or so, then take off an inch or so. And yeah, but like you say, you kind of know it when you see it. But the trick is not to wait till it gets too long, then reduce the height. So, if it gets up to about 4-inch, take off an inch back down to the 3-inch level, and then you're good. But the difficulties of mowing too low, you're exposing the roots to more heat and sunlight. Evaporation's more out of a low, if you mow low. The evaporation is greater, and you're stressing the lawn. The roots don't grow as deeply. And so over time, that can weaken your lawn, and some of these other problems that we mentioned can set in.
How about watering? How often should we be watering? We teased to this earlier. What's the rule of thumb? What's Don's rule of thumb?
So for all the things that can go wrong with a lawn that we mentioned, anything, dog spots, all these other things, insects, drought, getting your lawn back in shape. One of the key things is proper watering. And what does that mean? If our if our lawn's got 1 inch of rain a week, or even a week and a half, we'd need to do no extra watering because that's the preferred amount for lawns is 1 inch of rain a week. And a lot of research has been done on this too. And when you do need to water and supplement the rainfall, applying 1 inch a week in one application. If you're on real sandy soil and listening to this, then divide that into 2. But the rule of thumb is 1 inch a week in one application, because that inch of rain then is going to soak down into the soil, and it's going to encourage the roots to go down deep, and a deeply rooted turf is much healthier. If we're doing frequent light sprinkling, such as 3-4 times a week, and if we're just sprinkling and it's never penetrating down in, that's where the roots are going to stay. The roots are going to stay more shallow, and again, that's not creating a healthy, vigorous turf. So water less often and water deeper. So, how do you know when you're getting 1 inch on or so? I like the tuna can. Straight-sided can, tuna can, soup can, cat food can, and just set that out on the lawn in a couple spots and, see how you're doing, because every sprinkler puts out water differently. But the tuna can will let you see how much water you're actually applying. And so again, it's watering less often. So we're actually saving resources, water less often, but put more on at a time so it goes deeper. And it's actually saving water versus applying more often with less.
Now, in that letter that you read, I think one of the things that the person brought up is that they overseeded, but they also used weed killer on the lawn. When is a good time for that? And what are some good, again, we don't support certain products, but you've said in the past that you're not as fond of weed and seed as a product.
Yeah, the weed and feed.
Weed and feed, right.
Weed and feed concept that has the combination of fertilizer granules plus a granular type weed killer. Now, most of our lawns aren't a carpet of weeds. Most of us have a weed here, a weed there, one over there. And so I like spot spraying, a lawn weed killer that kills broadleaf weeds, non-grass weeds. So it'll kill out your weeds, but not kill your lawn grass. Okay, so if you choose one of those, I like spot spraying. I take my little 2-gallon pump sprayer, and you can cover quite a bit of ground, give each one a little spritz. And the weed and feed granular products, since most of our lawns aren't a carpet of weeds, weed and feed carpets the entire lawn with the weed killing part. But when you read the labels, notice I don't say if you read the label, but when all of us read these labels on the products, the weed and feed indicates that the lawn needs to be wet for those granules to stick to the weeds. Those granules are contact weed killers. The weeds have to be already growing, and so the little plantains or dandelions or anything else in there, those granules have to cling, so it has to be either dewy or you have to water right away. And if those little granules just roll off, they aren't going to have effective kill on those. And they're not good weed preventers, so they aren't really preventing weeds from coming up. And that's why, using those over your whole lawn is kind of a questionable use of resources. Because each year I get emails from people saying, I used weed and feed, but it really didn't work that well. And, well, of course, the little granules have a way of just rolling off of dry weeds. And so it's difficult to use, and it's kind of overkill, I suppose. On that. Overkill. I wish it did kill the weeds, but it's maybe not. But you know what I mean. Overkill of a use of a resource. And so I really like the wise, judicious use of spot spraying the weeds that we need to control, because some of them, such as thistle, my gosh, if you don't control Canada thistle, you'll have a lawn that is all Canada thistle.
Something you don't want to walk on.
Exactly. So on some of those hard-to-kill weeds, hit them now in May when they're tender. In the middle of summer, when sometimes you see some of these things more, that's a hard time to kill. For example, Canada thistle just becomes tough, leathery, waxy, and it's hard to kill in the middle of summer. So fall and May are good times. Many of the hard-to-kill weeds also may not die with one application. So we need to out-persist the persistent weeds.
We're not highlighting any one particular brand, but what's the active ingredient that you should look for in spot weed?
Well, active ingredients are actually kind of generic. Many different companies have them. So the standard lawn weed herbicide is 2,4-D, 2,4-D amine form. And is that the ester form is more volatile, and chances are it would drift off to something. But 2,4-D amine
is the numerical. Number 2, number 4,
4. And then -D, 2,4-D. And so when you look at lawn weed killers and you look down at the active ingredient, many of them have 2,4-D or maybe another chemical as well on that. So that's kind of always been the standard. If you have some hard-to-kill weeds that are more resistant to 2,4-D, then a good product to have on hand is a lawn weed herbicide with the active ingredient triclopyr, triclopyr, triclopyr. That has a little more kick to it on hard-to-kill weeds, such as creeping Charlie and Canada thistle.
Will that damage grass?
That won't damage grass. Okay. Yep. When a person reads the label, it's used on lawn grass, doesn't kill grass. And so again, it's interesting. So as I mentioned, to kind of summarize how to get any lawn healthy. Maybe your lawn already looks good and you want to keep it that way, or maybe your lawn just looks all run down and patchy, and you wish. Okay, so it's set your mowing height high, 3 inches. Don't bag the grass clippings; let them filter on down. Fertilize in May. Don't forget the Labor Day fertilizing. Judiciously spot spray weeds. If you have had heavy traffic and your lawn is really compacted, then aerate. The core aeration that pulls up little plugs of soil out of that can help a heavily compacted lawn to get back. And then water deeply. Less often, but deeper. And all of those things together create a healthy turf that is more self-sustaining. A deeper rooted turf will need less water because it can get water from down below. And it'll be thick, so you'll need less weed control. And it'll even, if you return the clippings, it'll even self-fertilize itself a bit. And so they become more self-sustaining and more friendly to us all. And so anyway, those are the things. But again, gardening teaches us patience, and of course, reseed spots too. I should mention that. But doing the small right things over 3 years, and I think almost any turf can be brought back to health.
All right. Well, I know that this won't be the last time we talk about lawns this summer, lawns and watering. But if people have any questions about their lawns now, like the question that you got earlier, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, send me an email, donald.kinsler, spelled KINZLER, at ndsu.edu. And I love the pictures people send in. That's awesome. And feel free to send me photos of something that's doing well. That's always a day brightener too.
Celebrate your wins and ask about the things that aren't.
Yeah, I always enjoy assisting when I can with things not going well. But man, I love seeing things that do go well as well.
All right, Don. Well, thanks again for stopping by and talking with us.
Thank you, John, and thanks everyone for listening. Have a good week.